This is the flag of Bahrain, and it ought not to be confused with the very similar looking flag of Qatar, which has several waves and has a darker red section. But it is Bahrain's flag we are going to discuss today, not the Qatari flag. I once heard that Bahrain's flag does not look very Islamic in a discussion that I had with a couple of acquaintances from university when we were discussing various Arab countries, and then we came into discussing their flags and their symbolism. And it was in this discussion where they claimed that the Bahraini flag does not seem very Islamic, unlike a lot of other flags around the Middle East and North Africa. And they motivated this by comparing it to other Arab flags, noting for example that it lacks a shahada, the profession of belief within Islam, like for example the Saudi flag. It lacks other Islamic terms like the takbir or Allahu Akbar, God is greater, as found on for example the Iraqi flag. It also lacks a crescent, which by the way is not that much of an Islamic symbol, but it is adopted on a lot of flags of countries that profess their state religion as being Islamic or having a majority of people that are Muslims. And I vehemently disagreed about the Bahraini flag's symbolism not being very Islamically oriented. Rather, I argued that it is indeed very Islamically oriented. It is just done through other types of symbolism that are not just as commonly used or apparent to someone that is not very into Islamic symbolism. And I thought that this was such an interesting thing to discuss that I wanted to bring it to you, my dear viewers, as well. And this is the Bahraini flag. As you can notice, it has two big sections with waves between them, symbolizing two seas. In fact, Bahrain's name even means two seas in Arabic. And the origins of this name are kind of vague, but it can potentially refer to both sides of the island of Bahrain being surrounded by the sea, or it could refer to the fact that there exists fresh water on the island and it is surrounded by salt water, making the fresh water found on dry land a kind of sea in comparison to the outer sea surrounding it. And thus one of these colors are also connected to dry land. And both the sea and dry land will be important later in this video. But for right now, I want you to notice the fact that the number of waves between these two sections are 5. And 5 is an important number within Islam. First, you have the 5 pillars of the faith. And these are the profession of the Muslim creed, the shahada, the charity to the poor, the zakah, the fasting on the month of Ramadan, the Sawm, and the pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj, and lastly, the prayers to God, the Salah, which are 5 daily prayers within Sunni Islam, to which most of the elite within Bahrain belong to. Though a sizable portion, if not even the majority in Bahrain, belong to Shia Islam. And there has been a lot of sectarian issues and tensions between the Sunni elite and Shia population historically here, and even in the present, which I'm not going to go into, as that is not connected to the main goal of this video. I only wanted to mention that 5 prayers are a Sunni practice and not a Shia practice. Though technically the Shia do pray the same prayers, they just combine 2 of the prayers into 2 of the others, thus making them 3 prayers. But in any case, the 5 waves are either a reference to the 5 pillars of the faith or a reference to the 5 daily prayers. It ought also be pointed out that previous versions of the Bahraini flag did actually not have 5 waves, so this is a more recent modification of the flag to include this sort of symbolism of having 5 waves or 5 points that connects to this greater Islamic symbolism of the number 5 being important. Also notice that the section with the full waves is white, because this flag also has a lot of interesting color symbolism to it as well, that interconnects with these 5 waves end with greater Islamic color symbolism. First you have white, which is connected to the purity of faith, and you have red, the color of blood and martyrdom, and self-sacrifice generally, where the 5 waves, the prayers or the pillars of faith, stand as an interconnector between these two concepts of sacrifice and the faith being interconnected, with the waves or points going into each other, creating a unified whole between them. You can also see these two colors being interconnected in other ways, with red standing in for the fleshy, the earthly world, and white standing in as representing the afterlife of the next world after death, as white not only represents the purity of heaven, but also death. You, for example, shroud people in white cloth after they die in Islam. And the great hereafter and the promise of the life after this life is, after all, the great promise of Islam, the promise of heaven, the promise of the eternal paradise, of eternal bliss, the great reward which you will receive as a believer after having struggled in this life with the religious obligations in the worship of God Almighty. And thus consequently the white represents the religious promise, and thus the religion more broadly too. And the waves or points going back and forth can thus be interpreted as showing the interaction between the religious and the earthly and fleshy unified in one flag. Waves and the seas also have connections to certain Sufi thought that compare the religious experience to going into the sea, though I am less certain about this connection to the flag, as it is kind of esoteric and far out there. But it is also another possibility where you have the red symbolizing the dry land as the worldly, and the white symbolizing the sea as the spiritual, which you are entering into as a religious believer when you, for example, pray or do various other acts of religious belief, of piety, of worship, which brings you closer to the vastness of God, which is likened to the vastness of the sea. But in any case, this is a possible interpretation too of the symbolism found on the Bahraini flag, even if I'm somewhat iffy about this due to not having found evidence for any major Sufi influence on Bahraini history or on the Bahraini flag. But in any case, this possible symbolism, together with all the other possible symbolism that I've mentioned in this video, shows that the Bahraini flag is indeed rather Islamic. And me describing this sort of symbolism and giving it context also showcases the importance of understanding that a lot of symbolism is often very subtle and can easily be overlooked by those not initiated in the knowledge about the symbols and the context around them. And I hope you liked this video about the Bahraini flag and its symbolism. Please do ask questions and comment on this video, and I will try to respond as quickly as possible. Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities. اشتركوا بالقناة من فضلكم.